us about your work and what you've learned about the African Americans who worked here in Oak Ridge during the Manhattan Project.
I became interested in this project when I was a little girl. My grandmother used to tell us stories about the 40s and how they came here and left their children back in Alabama with their grandmother. And she would always talk about giving one day to the bomb and about the rats and the plank sidewalks and all those kinds of things. So in about 1981, when I was at Berea College, we have a month, the month of January, where we can choose what we want to do. So I decided to come home and interview people here about their experiences during the 40s. So I did a paper called Blacks in the Ridge, and later on I did another article called New Hope, which is in the book These Are Our Voices, which was presented by the Children's Museum here in Oak Ridge.
So tell us about your grandmother's experience.
My grandmother is a wonderful woman who came here very poor. They came from Auburn, Alabama. First, my grandfather came, Willie Strickland. And that's how it is. One person comes and then more family people come. And they had to leave Alabama because they were very poor, as I said before, and also they weren't making much money. So this was an opportunity for them to come and better themselves, make a better life for their whole family. So when she arrived in Oak Ridge, she lived in the Hutments, which was a section that was set aside for black women. And there were usually 4 women in the room, and there was like a pot belly stove in the middle. And my grandmother said that she didn't like to eat the food at the cafeteria, so she would cook in that room. She would make biscuits. She'd cook chicken. She'd do everything because she said that that other kind of food made her sick. So she was just a person that would clean up, and she took much pride in doing her job, and it was just a good opportunity for them to make some money. And grandmother tells a story about getting paid and having all that money spread out on the bed, and they would send lots of money back home to take care of their children.
What was her job?
She was basically a janitor. She didn't have much education. My grandfather didn't have much education either. The story goes that most of the blacks that were brought here because they were uneducated and they couldn't read anything or learn anything about the project that could be passed on.
Do you think that's true?
To some degree, I believe it is, because most of them didn't have the jobs that were scientific or anything like that. They were mostly laborers. They helped build the buildings, K-25 and what have you.
How many blacks were there in Oak Ridge?
I'm not certain about how many there were. I would love to be able to find that out and also be able to have a reunion someday of all of those people that once were involved in that project. A lot of the pictures that my grandmother has now are of people that they either can't remember or the names have been forgotten or whatever.
So your grandmother's still alive?
Yes, she is. My grandmother turned 89 August 21st, 2005. And she still cooks for us every Sunday. We all gather together at her house and have dinner. And she still has that pan that she used when she was making biscuits there in that Hutman section.
And she still has pictures?
She still has some pictures, yes.
Great. Well, we need to get an interview with her if she would agree to that.
I'm sure she would.
That would be wonderful. That would be terrific. Let's see. Tell us more about your interviews and what you learned and how this experience changed their lives, how people felt about being here. Did they just talk?
I interviewed about 10 or 11 people, and some of them had good things to say about Oak Ridge and some had bad things to say about Oak Ridge. They talked about, the rats and some of the other things, but their story is different from a Caucasian story for the mere fact that the women were in the Hutman section, which was surrounded by barbed wire. the black men and women, even if they were married, couldn't stay together. My grandmother talks about trying to sneak in to see my grandfather and vice versa, and she said that some of the FBI men really liked her biscuits, so they would turn their heads sometimes to allow them a little time together. There were some people who talked about some of the racism that they experienced during that time. There's a man named Paul White, he's still alive, who talks about going to the bus station and ordering a sandwich or whatever, and you pay for it, and then you go around to the back, and they would stick it out of a pigeonhole, as he called it, to him. So they were happy to have more money, more opportunities, but racism was still prevalent here in Oak Ridge. Now, there was a discussion at one point about creating a community that would be filled with nice homes for blacks, but the influx of people into Oak Ridge was so fast and so tremendous that the blacks got put aside and had the worst housing. There were some whites that were in white males that lived in hutments for a number of years as well. So I'm not saying that some whites didn't have some of the bad as well, but all the blacks were treated like, I think, second-class citizens. And we are people that endure, and they endured whatever in hopes of a better future for them and their families.
Do you think that this experience led to a better future for some of these families?
I think it did, definitely. My grandmother, she said when she first got here she didn't like it, but she stayed, and they've been here ever since. They've come to love Oak Ridge dearly, and those jobs led to other jobs, and more family came to Oak Ridge and what have you. So yes, it was a good thing for them.
Can you, in your research, it's my impression that they provided some recreational facilities for the black community. Can you describe the community, what kind of resources there were, and what kind of good points and bad points there were about that area?
In the beginning, when they were still in the hutments, they had a recreation hall, and grandmother talked about that. You could go there and play games and have fun, and they always had managed to have fun, have good times. And I don't know how late you want me to talk about, because later on in the years when they established a black community, they had a recreation hall as well, and that was about in the 50s or so. Do you want me to talk about the 50s, or you just want to stay with the 40s?
Well, you can bring it to date, that's fine.
Okay. And there was a center there, and of course you could play games, and of course they would have parties and their good times as well. And one of the good things about them is that they had churches, and the church has always been a source of strength for blacks. And I believe in the beginning there were like a couple of churches that started, and then I think now we have 4 in the Scarborough community now.
So tell me the history of the Scarborough community.
Scarborough is over here near Y12. It's behind the Kmart now. But in the beginning, when they were trying to decide where to place the black community, they were given 2 options. One was over in East Village, which would have been far out for many of them. So they chose Scarborough, which would be close to downtown and what have you. A lot of discussion goes on about that, because that community was called Gamble Valley after a man named Gamble. And some of that stuck with the community, and many people didn't want it to be called Gamble Valley. It sounds negative, has a very negative connotation, of course. And they named it Scarborough. And the housing there was nice. They got nice new houses. Most of them were duplexes. They also had some single family dwellings as well. And first, my grandmother lived on Fisk, and with her daughters. The daughters were able to come to Oak Ridge finally in about 1949 or so. And they were able to go to school, but there wasn't a school per se for black students. And they would have volunteers, like Caucasians would come over and volunteer and teach them and what have you. And it wasn't the best school, but it did provide some education for them. And my mother was in the last graduating class of Scarborough, the black school. And she was the valedictorian of that class, and she still has her speech. And it's a very good speech. I'm very proud of her. And she envisioned a better world for everybody in that speech. But before they had the Scarborough High School here in Oak Ridge, the blacks that were of high school age had to be bused to Knoxville. The schools didn't integrate here in Oak Ridge until 1954, just for the high school only. The junior highs integrated later, and the elementary schools integrated about 1967 or so.
I think I heard about your grandma's biscuits.
Right.
That's a great story. That's a great story.
She said that she would tilt the pan up, and I guess she'd have something underneath it, and they would brown on one side, and then she'd change them around and let them brown on the other side. She just made a way. Always determined and such a good person, always sharing as well.
How did your, I guess your grandfather came first?
Yes, he came
So
first.
tell me, how did they hear about the project?
I believe that there were some people roaming through the South asking for people to come and go to Oak Ridge to work. And my Uncle Harvey, who was married to my aunt, heard about it first. And so Uncle Harvey convinced Granddaddy to come up and check it out. And so they did. And like I said, they never made so much money in their lives. They were so poor in Alabama. They had gardens and they were making it okay, but barely. So they decided to come to Oak Ridge, and then more and more of our people went or came to Oak Ridge as well.
Can you go back a couple of generations in your family? Were they once slave on big plantations and then became sharecroppers, or what's the history?
I'm not sure about the slavery part because I haven't done any research on that, but they were sharecroppers for a while, and then they were able to get their own land and work that. And they talk about the abundance of food that they were able to produce. It was just that they didn't have any money at all, barely making anything down there in Alabama.
When they got here, where were the rest of the Afro-Americans from? What kind of...
A lot of them came from Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and of course there were some people here in Tennessee that worked on the project as well.
And why were they not part of the Army? I mean, just were they too old, or how did that work?
My grandfather would have been too old for the Army at that point. But since you brought up the Army, there were lots of blacks that were participating in the Army, and I think that their participation in the Army and other pressures that were put on the government provided this opportunity for them to become a part of that particular program here in Oak Ridge, because most of the times when African Americans got anything here in this country, pressure had to be put on the government. There was an executive order that the president put forth that allowed blacks to work here in Oak Ridge, and there was a threat of a march on Washington and other things that helped bring that about. So it was a wonderful opportunity for them, but the timing was right because of all the things that were going on in the world. It helped to bring about that opportunity. And I don't know if that really made good sense, but they were coming out of the Great Depression right before the war and everything, and the good thing about them is they've always been able to produce enough food for their families. During the Great Depression, down in Alabama, they were really poor, and the good thing about my family is that they were always able to produce enough food for everybody to eat, and they essentially sort of lived together. My great-grandmother, grandmother, aunts, uncles, cousins, they would take everybody in, and work the farm and try to get jobs outside of the home to make ends meet. So right before the 40s, when all that was going on, they were longing for an opportunity to make some money, to better themselves here in life. And with the war starting and blacks going off to fight for the country, because they've always been patriotic, always wanted to be a part of it, to do their part, there was a lot of pressure put on the government to allow blacks to work on the Manhattan Project so that they wouldn't have to have a march on Washington, which was being threatened because a lot of people were starting to realize that if we're giving our lives for this country, we should be treated as American citizens should be. Everybody should be treated equally. We want a bigger piece of this pie so that our families can become better and prosper as well. We want to be treated as equal citizens. So with the Great Depression happening and then the war occurring, all of that helped to bring about this opportunity for blacks to be here in Oak Ridge.
Well, your grandfather must have been, and your great uncle must have been kind of entrepreneurial and pretty spirited guys to kind of take that chance and go hundreds of miles away. What were they told? They probably just told it was a project. They couldn't know what they were working on.
Exactly.
You want to talk about that a little bit?
They were told, please come and work if you will, and there's a job, and you'll be paid a certain amount of money, and that sounded good to them because they always say that they weren't making anything at home. So they got on the trucks and trains, and they came to better themselves, to provide opportunities for a better lives for their families.
That's great. In terms of, were other members of the Scarborough community, did they have similar stories in that it was not just one family member came, other family members joined, and you'd have sort of large groups that were, of related people who came from either the same town or even the same family? Was that a pattern?
For some, there were some single people that came too. Miss Oriole Ayers came here as a single lady, and later on then she found a husband here. So there are various stories. In my family, it started with two, and then my grandmother came, and later on, others came as well.
Were in your research looking at this community, did you find that there were some who after the war said, "Oh, I'm going home now"?
Oh yes, a lot of people left.
Don't forget, that they can't hear my question, so.
Okay. After the war was over and the project was questionable as to what's going to happen, a lot of people did return homes. There's no place like home. But by then, my grandparents had their girls up here, and they were in school and doing well, and Oak Ridge became home to them. This was still a good place where they had jobs and opportunities. And my grandmother at one time worked at one of the hotels, and she said that she was the dessert girl, and she said that people really enjoyed her cooking, and so one thing always leads to another. She really loves Oak Ridge. And in fact, my mother says to this day she wouldn't live anywhere else in the whole world.
That's great. The Chamber of Commerce love you. This is good. She didn't work in the Alexander Inn, did she?
Yes, it was the Alexander Inn.
Tell us about that.
She told me that she would fix the desserts.
Start again, my grandmother.
Okay. My grandmother worked at the Alexander Inn as the dessert girl, and she would fix up all the desserts, and she talked about, put them in their dishes and what have you, and she talked about how much people enjoyed her cooking. And she's still a great cook, too, and she said that many people would always ask for more of her desserts and what have you, so she really enjoyed that experience.
Can you describe some of the desserts?
She hasn't ever really gone into detail with me about anything specifically, but my grandmother makes this butter roll in which you take the biscuits and the sugar and the butter and milk, and it's her own concoction, and it's one of my favorite desserts. It's just so good, and people are still asking, "Where's some butter rolls? Where can I get that?" She makes all kinds of stuff that people come around asking for more of.
You've got to get a recipe before she.
Exactly.
Probably in her head, right?
Everything is in her head. Everything.
Well, they're trying desperately to buy the Alexander Inn.
Oh yes.
So that's why it'd be nice to have. It's nice to have that story, and hopefully we find some pictures of her, with the dessert. I don't know if she has any.
I don't think so.
Like the dessert girl. Do you know anything more about the Alexander Inn in terms of did she have friends who worked there with her, or anything she talked about the people who stayed there? Or?
No, I can't recall anything else that she's mentioned about that.
That's great. Let's see. What other stories? They talk about the mud. Everybody talks about the mud.
Mm-hmm. My grandmother talks about giving that day toward the bomb, and I know that there was a day called the Sunday Punch Day where everybody decided that they would work, but the money would go toward the project, and I think that's what she meant by that. And she takes a lot of pride in saying that I gave a couple of days to the bomb, because, like I said, they wanted to feel a part of everything, and they were American citizens, and they were very patriotic. And someone asked me about their experience as far as when the war ended and how they expressed themselves, because you'll see all the pictures of the whites that were coming out of the movie theater, and they were very joyful and what have you. But of course the blacks couldn't go to the movie theater, so I'm sure that they had a private celebration of their own, maybe in their recreation center, where they talked about how glad they were that it was over with. But there's always a difference when you don't feel like you're really a part of everything, or you can't take part in certain things, you feel left out. And she's never really talked that much about that, but I'm sure that they were, just totally elated that the war was over, just like everybody else. I think that generally, even to this day, sometimes you feel like you probably don't have the support or the police protection that you would desire. There's always going to be some people who are going to try to do some things they shouldn't do, illegal things or what have you. But growing up in the Scarborough community, I just remember it being a safe, wonderful place to be. And it was a wonderful environment. I always felt safe, secure, and it was a wonderful community to grow up in. Everybody took pride in their homes and keeping everything up and all those kinds of things. On every street you see flowers and trees. Everybody was just doing a good job of keeping up their property when I was growing up.
Yeah, it's sort of way after the war, though.
Now, going back to the 40s when the ladies were separated in the pen, surrounded by barbed wire, they were told that it was for their protection that they were enclosed in that area like that. They called that area the pen. And the men lived in another section not too far away from them.
How many women versus men were there? Do you have any sense?
No, I don't.
From the stories of white folks who've interviewed, it seems that the average age was very young. I mean, the early 20s, and the supervisors were 30 at the most, and so it was a very youthful environment. Can you talk about the black community, that same thing, or were there a mix of ages?
I think that you're right. They were pretty young when they came to Oak Ridge.
Start again, because they won't hear my question.
Okay, that's right. When most of the blacks came to Oak Ridge, they were still quite young, 20s, 30s at the most, I would think. And probably some of the older folks probably thought, I'm not leaving my home. But the ones that were more adventuresome, the ones who wanted that opportunity, that didn't mind a little change, came to Oak Ridge.
Okay, what haven't I asked that I should ask you about? And any little anecdotes or, ironies, humor, just specific experiences, what they wore, how hard it was to get provisions or not, any little stories that you can think of that.
My grandmother says that you had to walk the line in Oak Ridge and do what you were supposed to do, or else they would put you out at the gate. And she says that some people were sent home because they wouldn't do whatever it was they were supposed to do. And so I think that she felt pretty safe and secure here in Oak Ridge. She talks about going to Knoxville and shopping for foods, and even going as far as Chattanooga and going back home every now and then as soon as they could. And she took the greatest pride in being able to send money home to take care of her girls. She had 4 girls that she left with her grandmother, and I know that had to be very hard on her to be separated from her daughters. And finally, my mother wrote her a letter and said, "You have got to come and get us." And so they went down and got them, and were all reunited again. And I'm sure that they were glad when they could bring their girls up here. And they talked about living in the flat tops, which are over there where the Walmart is today, and just making it work.
Can you describe what a flat top is?
A flat top has basically 2 bedrooms, 1 living area. You could use that for the living room, a bathroom, and a kitchen. So it's very small, but it was theirs, and they could be there all together.
So how many people from your family would live in a single flat top?
There were 6 of them at the time. They were in one flat top. And they talk about sleeping 2 people at one end and the other 2 at the other end. A lot of togetherness, but, close quarters.
Would that have been during the war or right after the war?
This would be after the war.
Okay. That's great. I'm just curious, did your grandparents, the grandparents were taking care of your mother, the
Right.
girls, did they come here or did they stay home?
They eventually came. So, like I said, eventually the whole family came, and then some of them went further on up into Alexandria, Virginia, and the Washington, D.C. area. And I was going to say on my father's side, but I guess I should focus on my own side because grandmother is the one that came.
That's great. I promised to get you out. Let's see. I will really look forward to seeing. Can you think of any of the pictures that your grandmother has that we might get to?
They have them on file here because Christy did scan all of them.
Oh, they did. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Can you think of any that just that you could describe to me now?
They have a lot of them that were taken in the recreation hall of just showing people enjoying themselves, just living life, having a good time together. And so I think they made the best out of Oak Ridge. If things were hard as far as living conditions or whatever they experienced, they managed to be able to have some recreation time to enjoy themselves, to be a community together, because they weren't really a part of the major community.
So tell me what they did in the recreation. Your pictures show them doing what?
They played pool and cards, and they ate a lot, those kinds of things.
Dances?
Yes, they did have dances. And they have pictures of that. Grandmother has pictures of that.
What kind of music did they listen to?
I'm not sure. I guess that would be with the swing era. I can't remember what they listened to in the 40s.
Did they do you have any recollection? Did they sing and did they have concerts kind of thing? That they...
Not in the 40s, I don't believe. They would have been singing at church.
So did they use the chapel on the hill, but they had their own church?
They talk about the church on the side of the road, and one church service would take place, and then the next group would come in, and then finally they were able to one day get their own building later on. But that was a very important part of their lives, was church. And Reverend Sims was the one that was their leader at the time. And that became the Oak Valley Baptist Church, which is still here today, later on.
When you say the church on the side of the road, was that the name of it?
Yeah, it was like a building, and they would, a lot of different groups would use it.
That's the same is true of the church on the hill. So
Exactly, right.
Were people free to travel to all parts like Jackson Square? I mean, they could free to move throughout Oak Ridge. They weren't restricted to.
As far as I know, they weren't restricted to any one area. It's just that when it came to seeing movies or eating, those kinds of things, they couldn't do it with other Caucasians. So they pretty much kept themselves sort of like their own little community where they felt a part of things.
Did your grandmother talk about the security and the badging and how that worked, or is it,
Oh yes, you had to have a badge at all times, and she talked about when she picked up her girls for the first time when they came to visit, that they had to go to the gate and sign them in and what have you, and when they got ready to leave, they had to sign them out. My grandmother still has some copies of some of her paycheck stubs from those particular days.
which looked enormous then, but
Oh yeah, she said, "Oh, we're so happy to be making some money."